right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Welcome, everyone, to the Mechanical Magnificus Invention Show. Today, I'm going to be talking about a few of my most well-known projects and getting into a bit of how they work and how they got started. Got a couple of them up here on stage here. I'll mess around with when I get to them. So let's just go ahead and get going. So first off, oh, is this working? Oh yeah, that doesn't work anymore. Who am I? Well, I'm sure you probably all already know who I am, but I'm curious how many of you actually do. So like, how many of you actually already know me? Who knows Mechanical Magnificus? All right, awesome, wow. So those of you that don't, Mechanical Magnificus is a small workshop located here in Denver where I research, develop, and invent new technology to help fursuiters do what they do. Be more expressive, more alive, and more comfortable to wear. So I've been at it for about 7 years now, and I've really done an insane number of projects in that time. In fact, I've actually tried to map them out chronologically, but I can't stay on one thing for too long. So at one point I was working on like 6 projects at once. So I had to pick just a few. So I've got a couple of honorable mentions and then 3 that I'll dive into at length. So honorable mentions. I really like OLED eyes. I think that the animatronic eyes in fursuits are a really great way to make fursuits more expressive and more lifelike. But the problem is animatronic eyes glow. So I wanted to come up with a way of making really miniaturized robotic eyes that would physically move. So these are 3D printed and floating in propylene glycol, and they're moved around by electromagnets. But that's still really, really, really early in the development phases. So still got a lot of work to do on those. The next one I've been working on, I've got up here on the table, is a pair of digi-stilts. This is a development frame, so this is very, very, very far from complete. Currently they're powered by pneumatics, but I may take it a completely different direction later on. The whole idea is that it's modular, so I can change my mind as many times as I want to. I've got another video of those actually where I had them under active power, and a valve underneath the footplate is controlling air in and out of the cylinders. So this was the very first test that I did, so a little bit shaky, of course, but they are a heck of a lot of fun to wear. I'm going to be demonstrating these on Sunday at some point. I brought a little air canister to mess around with. This is really not the most high-tech project, but I just wanted to mention it because I actually get a lot of requests from people to do like dragon's breath using this technique. You literally just take a vape pen and then you hook some pumps up to it, and then you get a ridiculous amount of fog coming out of it. Using propylene glycol, not nicotine, of course. My last honorable mention is a project that I actually worked on for several years, but it's not one of my most favorite projects, and definitely not one of my most well-known. And the inspiration for this one came from 2019, where someone in the con room asked me to make a pair of digi-stilts for them that they could run in. And I spent the next couple of years figuring out how to make that possible and make that ergonomic and comfortable to wear. Ultimately, I learned a whole lot about 3D printing with composites and ruined a whole lot of 3D printer nozzles in the process. And I still haven't figured out if you can actually run in them or not, because I don't think my shoulders are strong enough. All right, so now on to the top 3 projects that I'm most well known for. The first one, of course, is a robotic tail. And I have this one up on stage here. Let's hope it doesn't have as much stage fright as I do. So this is controlled by a set of servos in this housing here. And basically what it's doing is it's responding to acceleration and rotation. if it'll go ahead and turn on. And this battery pack might be running a little low. Let me hold it still and we'll get. So it, there it goes. Yeah. Okay, well, it worked for a little bit. Still got some electrical issues there or something. Thank you. It works the same as most other cable pullers, but I tried to do something different with this one, making it smooth so that you can put fur over the top of it and not see any of the obvious ridges. When you pull on a cable, it shortens the length of one side and causes it to curl. Pretty simple. But this project, which I'm still working on, started back in 2015 or so, when I was working at your local neighborhood Home Depot, providing excellent customer service, stocking shelves, and driving the forklift around. And really that gave me a lot of time to think about what I could do with the materials that I was surrounded by. So I saw a piece of chain one day and thought, that could be a tail. So I got some soda straws and some string and made the worst tail ever made. It was very heavy, it barely moved at all. It kind of crumpled rather than wagged, but I didn't get discouraged. So for the next year or so, I learned how to cast with rubber and made this monstrous 10-pound solid urethane steel and Kevlar cable puller tail that was just very unwieldy. I was going for realistic muscle mass, so I picked a durometer of rubber that was very close to the density of muscle, and didn't really work out. And when I had it furred, you could see the ribs underneath the fur as well, which definitely was not very attractive. So I had another go at it, trying to streamline it a bit. And I thought to myself, well, maybe I can make this something that more people want. So I played around with adding some servos to it, learned how to code with Arduino, and I tried to make it more streamlined. And came up with the idea to have the electronics, so the motor and the battery pack are actually modular. So the tail can be anywhere, or these can be anywhere in your costume, and they don't add any extra bulk to the back of the tail like a lot of other tails do. I retook a mechatronics class in college, not because I wanted to, but because I literally failed the first one. But I'm glad I did, because I learned how to get comfortable with electronics and make my own circuit boards, which is actually, by the way, not a good idea. It's actually way cheaper to just have a professional manufacture them for you than to try to make your own. I don't know what I was thinking. And I think this is in 2016 or so, I created the Mark III. This prototype aired. It was still solid urethane. And the servos that I was using definitely were not as strong as they were advertised. So as you can see, only the tip of it is able to move. But a lot of that is because the whole thing was made out of solid urethane. And the motors are definitely not strong enough to lift that. But it still had the basic concept. And in 2017, I found out about this convention called DenFur, as you know, probably. And the idea was, I'm going to make a tail and bring it to the dealer's den and then show it off at my very first furry convention. And I spent quite a bit of time trying to add features to it, make sure that it could actually know where it was. So I had these crazy, complicated gears in there to try to track the position of it. I had a controller so you could control it. And I tried to take out a whole lot of the friction that was causing it to not be able to lift itself by using Teflon. And I didn't know how to work with Teflon at the time. So as I was shipping it back and forth to my friend in California, who's a professional programmer, the Teflon tubing actually ripped out because it wasn't glued properly. And in 2018, I went to DenFur to show off a non-working RoboTail. But I'm glad that I did, because while I was there, this dude behind me came up to my booth. He was selling a book called The Wayward Astronomer, which is a fantastic novel. If you ever get a chance to read it, definitely check it out. And he's like, this is some real engineering work that you're doing here. Do you want to come work for a space company? And I was like, do say more right now. And for the next 5 years, I've been working at this amazing small business where I've been designing and building mechanisms to explore space. And that has been an absolute dream job. And it never would have happened without the furry fandom. So I'm just extremely thankful for all of you that put this together and make it happen. And at that point, I could have just stopped, rode off into the sunset with an awesome space job, but I still wanted to get this tail thing working. So I spent the rest of 2019 working on a foam version that would be much, much lighter. I beefed up the servos and used cable pullers, pulleys, I mean. I thought I figured out how to do Teflon, and I was like, I'm gonna take this and use it for my very, very first time fursuiting. But my first time fursuiting, I did not have a working robotail still. The Teflon tubes, once again, ripped out, and there was nothing I could really do to fix it. So I took a big break from that for a while and worked on a project for a furry that had recently lost his hands. And that was always a big, big fear of mine. And when I saw this guy on Twitter trying to make the best of it and still staying optimistic through something like that, something so ridiculously traumatic, I couldn't even imagine. And the guy became my hero immediately, so I just wanted to make him these. And 8 months into this 2-month project, I sent him the hands. I had to learn a whole lot about miniaturizing mechanisms. Got a resin 3D printer, learned how to use that. Learned how to actually become capable of coding things. And a year later, I went and made this working version of the tail, thanks to the things that I learned from that project. And I finally realized how you actually are supposed to secure Teflon. You actually want to flare it at the end and then capture it inside of a hole that's too small for it to fit back through. So if you've ever done plumbing work and you flared a piece of tubing, it's the exact same thing. And the goal for that one was to try to get it done before MFF. And I actually managed to succeed at doing that. And I met a whole lot of amazing people at MFF. Still not as good as DenFur, though. Definitely not. I mean, it's run by crazy people or something. So I've still got a lot of work to do on this project. I need to eliminate the twisting problem, try to make it more affordable for people if I'm actually going to sell these things, make them easier to assemble, if I'm going to just post the instructions on how to make these things, which is probably the route that I'm going to go, because I don't really like making the same thing over and over and over again. But the Robotail taught me a lot. It was the first project that I ever worked on, and it was the one that got me my job that I love, the one that introduced me to the furry fandom, and it's the one that made me feel competent at actually making things. So along the way, I've made a whole lot of things, and you'd think that the Robotail would be the one that I got kind of recognized for, but it was actually these. These are a set of claws that I've been selling on Etsy for a while that actually work with touchscreens. So you can put these into your fursuit paws, and then you can use your smartphone without having to take off your hand paws. And I will demonstrate that right now by going to the next slide with one of these. And there we go. So the way they're made is actually fairly complicated, but I'll tell you all the details. I'm fully open about how these things are made. If you guys want to make them yourself, just let me know and I'll send you the recipe for them. They start with a 3D printed blank that leaves some space for a tip. The whole thing gets jacketed in foam inside of a 3D printed mold. And that gives them a compliant tip that's soft on the surface of a touchscreen to get a good surface area contact. Then they are prepped. They're given a conductive coating of graphite and Reynolds Eurocoat. Then finally a base coat of spray paint before the top coat of colored urethane to match that. And they can be matte, glossy, sparkly, glow-in-the-dark, fluorescent, anything you want. And then they get tipped with Teflon so that they slide easily across a smartphone screen or an iPad or whichever one. But this all started out actually as a promotional stunt that I did called a 1-hour build. And I was like, I'm going to try to solve a problem in the furry fandom in just 1 hour. And in that 1 hour of filming from multiple camera angles, I spent 2 weeks editing the footage for this video. And it was a huge hit. And that was the first time I'd ever gone past 1,000 followers on Twitter. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is insane. So I could see it going all the way around the world. You know, I would see people retweeting it in different languages and stuff. And that was just such a cool feeling. It really drove me forward to try to keep making new things. And I knew immediately I had to make a second version of these. The previous ones were made out of a conductive PLA that's just filled with graphite to make it conductive. So they could only be one color. And I wanted to change that. So I started playing around with doing the same thing and filling rubber with a bunch of conductive material to make it conductive and work with touchscreens, and injected that into 3D printed shells. They were really difficult to make. Sometimes they would actually explode while I was extruding the rubber into them because it was hardening too fast. But I still had a lot of fun with that. And but the tips were black, though, as you can see. So they still weren't exactly accurate. They weren't really what I wanted. So I started playing around with ideas on how to put a conductive coating around the entire outside of a claw. And at this point, I've been working on it for like 2 years. I tried silver-filled paints. That didn't work. I tried making my own conductive rutile titanium dioxide, you know, like you do, by superheating it with a blowtorch. I tried commercial ESD sprays, but that was adjacent to what I want, but not exactly. And it was kind of flaky, so that wasn't good either. But it wasn't until I was using my smartphone with a pair of gloves on and I realized that I didn't need to have direct contact with the screen. And I was just like, how is this working? That doesn't make any sense. And it still doesn't make any sense, honestly. It's probably magic or something. So I was like, I'll just make the whole thing out of conductive material and coat it with something colorful. And that ended up working. And for the next 2 years or so, I sold some on Etsy, refined the process some more, sold some on Etsy, took some extensive notes, and eventually they became what they are today, the only project that I've actually made money on. But somewhere along the way, this amazing creator named Magpie Bones reached out to me, and she's like, hey, Magnificus, can you help me with some projects? And I was like, probably. And she wanted me to 3D scan some of her claws and then digitize them and make larger versions of them, and then make touchscreen versions of them as well. And I was able to do that. I also helped her with a haptic feedback module for a tail so that you could feel where your tail was being touched. That one's still a proof of concept. I may work on that more if there's enough interest in it. But the main one that I worked on was a way to mount a claw to a finger without having to like glue it there. And that's when I came up with these. These are a metal bracket that you glue to any kind of claw. It doesn't have to be a Magnificlaw. And They were actually inspired by banjo picks because they have a metal bracket that clips around your finger. Now, these are made out of aircraft-grade aluminum, though, and they're media tumbled to be smoothed down. And later on, I even coated them with a Teflon-infused rubber so that they would be very, very soft. They're infinitely compliant, so you can change them up however you want, and it gives you all the dexterity that you need for drawing or playing games on your smartphone, or trying to pick things up off the ground. Because if you've ever tried to pick something up, it's like really, really difficult to do. But you take your claws out, put a couple of these on there, and then now you've got a pair of chopsticks built into your fursuit paws. So, that's sort of where the Magnificlaws are right now. I have a few more things that I'm going to try to do with them. One of those is this one right here. I'm trying to increase the durability while also cutting out some steps. So I've been playing around with switching to urethane rubber. No, not urethane rubber. Sorry, I've just been saying that word a lot. I'm switching out to silicone rubber, which is a whole lot more durable. But getting things to stick to it is kind of a problem. So I've been playing around with silver nanowire and stannous chloride to try to make an invisible conductive coating that goes onto the outsides of these. I've done some experiments with them, and so far I'm learning why it is so expensive to make conductive glass, and it is very, very difficult, but I'm pretty sure that we'll get there eventually. So why Magnificlaws? Well, they're the ones that sort of got people to pay attention. And that was a really exciting thing for me, that I could spark some interest and actually solve a problem. And they're the only one that so far has made it into other people's fursuits. And that is a really, really cool feeling to actually be a part of making some of that magic happen. And then I also got the opportunity to work with a really amazing maker. So that's why I want to talk about Magnificlaws. Wow, I'm going kind of fast here. I could slow down. Well, fortunately, this next one, there's actually a whole lot more to talk about. This is a cooling vest that I've been working on for inside of fursuits. And this is called the Magnificool. And basically, I should probably go to the next slide after I put this on. The way it works is you have a vacuum pack on the back that sucks air through a couple of open cell membranes, and it works, well, here we go, very similarly to a swamp cooler, actually. Now, it's not going to do anything for me right now because I haven't been sweating, surprisingly, but it basically sucks air in through these membranes and blows it out through a muffler, which I do not have attached right now, which is why it's so noisy. And it cools you down in the same way that your sweat is supposed to cool you down. So the more you sweat as you're running around in your fursuit, the better this actually works. It's drawing that into a low pressure zone and causing it to evaporate very quickly and taking all of the heat with it through something called the latent heat of fusion. And although it may seem obvious right now to just suck air through a fursuit to try to cool someone down, it definitely wasn't always that obvious. So the story begins back in 2019, my very first time fursuiting, with a non-working robotic tail, remind you. The fursuit parade, because the hotel we were staying at was much, much smaller, was mostly outside in the middle of August in direct sunlight. Yeah. And half of the people in the fursuit parade, before the end of it, just went straight to the headless lounge, while the other half actually went to go take some pictures. And I was in a full leather motorcycle racing suit, and I was about ready to die. I was sweatier than I'd ever been in my life, and I was like, I didn't even know there was that much water in me. Now I am 30% of a person. So, oh, and also Ben Diskin was there, voice actor for Haida Hyena from Gretzko. So that was cool. I was there to witness him become a furry. That was pretty cool. When I got back to the Headless Lounge, which, by the way, is the best feeling in the world. They've got these like leaf blower things in there that when you're like dying of heat exhaustion, oh my gosh, man, it's incredible. So the whole rest of the con, I was actually running back, getting myself super, super hot and sweaty at the dances, and then going and cooling down in the Headless Lounge, going back to the dances, back to the Headless Lounge, just that over and over and over again, because it just felt so good. But in those Headless Lounges, I had some amazing conversations with the people about the different ways people try to stay cool. Some mentioned the fursuit, the easy cool down vest for fursuiters that just have ice packs in them. The most popular one is probably the fans that just blow air at your face, that help you feel really good. They don't really help you stay cool all that much. The more sophisticated high-end option is going with a water-cool suit where you have a radiator somewhere external, and that pumps liquid through a series of tubes mounted to a compression shirt of some sort. But the issue with those is you've got this big bulky thing that you have to carry around. They have become a little bit more streamlined lately with smaller ice pack versions, but you still have to have something external. And like the easy cool down vests, eventually the ice packs run out of their well, they stop being cold, and they actually start absorbing heat because it works both ways. If something has a very high specific heat, it can absorb a lot of heat as well. And some people told me that after like 2 or 3 hours or so, it actually just starts to become like worse because now you've got an extra layer of insulation almost. So I wanted to figure out a way of streamlining it, making it something that could work indefinitely, have something that maybe you just had some battery packs to swap in and out. So the first thing I started playing around with was Peltier coolers. They're a device that absorbs heat from one side to another, sucks heat directly through. It's basically a ceramic tile with some small, I'm not sure what they are inside it, some engineering sorcery going on behind these. But what I found was that they're extremely inefficient. So although being really tiny and solid state, they generate like 20 times as much heat as they subtract. So while one side is cold enough to literally freeze water, the other side is hot enough to boil it. So you have to have a pretty good heat sink anyway. So that wasn't going to work. At the time, thanks to the Robotail and thanks to DenFur, I was working at a very small aerospace company. And they let me play around with liquid nitrogen quite a lot. So I thought to myself, hey, liquid nitrogen's pretty good at cooling things down. What if we put that in a fursuit? I had some ideas of some kind of a crazy like freezer vest that just slowly let out an amount of compressed liquid nitrogen over time. But I did some math on that first, thankfully, because what I found was that it would take 5 pounds per hour to keep somebody cool in a fursuit vest. And I'm not so sure that room service is cool with you bringing dewars of liquid nitrogen to the convention. Also, nothing kills a room party like literally killing the room party. But it got me thinking, the reason that liquid nitrogen is cold is because it's evaporating. And there's this thing that physical materials do when they evaporate. If you go from one state to another, solid to liquid, liquid to gas, or one way or the other, there's an energy associated with that phase change. And specifically from going from liquid to gas, that's called the latent heat of vaporization. And I got to thinking, well, what if I use like refrigerant or something, like they put in like refrigerators? Well, I mean, R134A is pretty toxic, so that wasn't really going to work out. Thought about using those air duster things, because those get pretty cold when you spray them for a while. But I looked down this list on Engineering Toolbox, and I was like, is that a typo? Water? What the heck? It's like God tier at vaporizing, at latent heat of vaporization. So I was like, I need to find a way to evaporate water. But the problem with evaporating water is that it tends to do that at the boiling point of water. And although you may feel like you're boiling alive in a fursuit, you're still only at like 92 degrees or so. So luckily, there's this other physics thing where if you lower the pressure of something that you're trying to evaporate, it actually takes less energy, or it takes less heat to get it to change phases. So I started playing around with miniature vacuum pumps that hopefully I could just wear somewhere on my body and then have those just pull a vacuum and evaporate the water. I looked at maybe making a wearable version of this, but it just didn't seem feasible at the time. So a couple years went by, and I got to thinking, well, you know what? Maybe I'll just try to make something wearable. So I made a water cooler vest that literally just had an igloo cooler and a peristaltic pump that would circulate cold water through it. And I tried to do it with as small of a material budget as possible, made this whole thing for less than $100. So that was definitely a good way to go. And it was super easy to make too, actually. I have the plans for this. If anybody wants to make one for themselves, I'll send you all the files that you need and a video tutorial on how to put it together. But while I was at it, I actually did some very fun math where I factored in the latent heat of fusion for ice. See, ice is cold when it actually melts. It's not the fact that it's cold that makes it cold. Well, that seems kind of redundant, but it's the fact that it melts that is drawing away 334 joules of energy per gram, which is actually almost twice as much as liquid nitrogen. So if you're trying to keep something at below 93 degrees, rather than trying to freeze it down to like negative 200 degrees, then ice is actually more effective at doing that per gram than liquid nitrogen is. I just thought that was kind of fascinating. And then a few more years went by, and I found out about a material called VarioShore TPU. This is a 3D printer filament that you can extrude into a foam. It has little pockets of baking soda in it that expand when it comes out of the 3D printer nozzle through decomposition, and that inflates it into a foam as it's coming out. And I thought this was perfect for making modular air channels for my vacuum idea. Although I knew I wasn't going to be able to get a very good seal, so I thought I'll use something else. I'll use the Bernoulli's principles because I just learned about those in physics, so why not? The Bernoulli principles is that the faster air is moving, the lower pressure it is. So you can effectively create a vacuum by speeding air up. And in this experiment here, I have a closed loop of these air channels glued to a piece of spandex, and they were just moving the same air around, but it was speeding it up. And that was actually causing the water on the other side of this membrane to evaporate. So totally stoked by that success. I went on to make a wearable version, and it completely did not work. There was far too much friction inside of the channels, and it was far too leaky, so the air would end up just kind of getting blown out somewhere and then sucked in somewhere else. So the only place that was actually cold, does this work? Well, was right there where the gap was between the air channels. Now, I posted something on that. I posted something on Twitter about that, or should I say X? And lo and behold, the actual CEO of my company reached out to me and was like, hey, this project you've been working on reminds me of something that NASA's been trying to work on as well to keep astronauts cold in their spacesuits, or space fursuits. And he described to me what they were doing, where they were creating a vacuum inside of a person's glove, and then that would pull the capillaries closer to the surface of the skin, where it would be in contact with a heat exchanger, where they could then move heat much more effectively because you didn't need to have as much surface area. And I was like, that's grotesque. There's no way I'm doing that. So I was like, oh my gosh, why is NASA overcomplicating things? And I thought about it for a minute. Well, why am I overcomplicating things? Why don't I just use a vacuum? Like, it's got it in the name, you know? And that very same night, I rushed out to Home Depot, 10 minutes before they closed, became that guy, and I built this little proof of concept with a piece of fur on top of it, a sheet of plastic, some open cell foam, and then underneath that, a liquid-soaked membrane, and then a skin analog, aka more plastic. And when I hooked my shop vac up to this, it got surprisingly cold. It went from room temperature down to like 60 degrees in some spots, which was pretty insane. And at that point, I was just charged with enthusiasm. And I made a wearable version of it. And with that surprising success, I was absolutely overjoyed, as you can see. Wow. It literally felt like wearing ice packs. Here's a thermal video of it so you can see there the black regions that are starting to form underneath my arms there. That's where it's actually getting cold. So everything that's black is somewhere around 60 degrees Fahrenheit or so. Now that's not quite the temperature of ice, far from it, but that's still, it still felt like wearing ice packs for some reason. And that's because we don't really feel temperature based on the actual temperature of an object. We feel it based on how well it moves heat from one place to another. So if something has a very high thermal conductivity, then it's going to feel a whole lot colder than something the same temperature that is not as thermally conductive. A week later, I went and made a wearable version using a shop vac, a little handheld shop vac that I got off Amazon. And that worked pretty all right. But the problem with that was that the battery pack couldn't actually charge it continuously while using the shop vac. But I still made another version of it because I had something to do. See, that year, I said, I'm going to enter the dance competition, and I'm going to wear my Magnificus cooling vest out on stage for the dance competition. So this whole time, I was building up to this event where it was going to be this big promotional stunt. And I was going to be like, well, here's this thing, and look, it works because I was able to dance in it and not die. Here's me in the dance competition from last year. Now, at Midwest Fur Fest, I actually ran into Strobes as he was walking out. And I said, hey, Strobes, would you like to wear one of my cooling vests when I get them made for your next dance competition? And he said, no, I wouldn't want to get an unfair advantage over the other competitors. And I was like, wow, that is so cool. I gained a lot of respect for Stripe, like right in that moment. And he said, I might wear it as a practice aid, but I wouldn't want it to give me an unfair advantage over the other competitors. And remembering that, I did not wear the cooling vest for the dance competition. But I still managed to get 3rd place, all on my own, and I am darn well proud of that. I did, however, manage to get some fun data from the convention to help influence the current version of the design. I walked around with some freaky-looking scientific tools, a spectrum analyzer, a decibel meter, and a humidity sensor, to try to figure out what sort of sound this thing could make and not be noticeable in a furry convention. And for most open floor spaces where there's lots of people talking, you have about 60 to 80 decibels or so of range. And you have a average frequency somewhere between 400 and 600 hertz, just in case you were curious. I also took humidity data, but I don't think I have that on here. But I also had a survey for how long people wanted it to last. And most people said forever, which did not come as a surprise. I thought, well, I can do a couple hours at least. So I've gone away from the Amazon vacuum cleaner special to a miniaturized electric ducted fan that you can get on Alibaba for like $6, surprisingly. They spin at like 110,000 RPMs, and they draw quite a bit of power. But I've been able to reduce the noise quite a bit with a tube that I have in the dealer's den, actually. And I've managed to find battery packs that will last for a minimum of 2 hours on full blast, so you can have the maximum amount of cooling for at least 2 hours. Maybe, so if you don't need it on as much, you could go a whole lot longer. Now, I've still got a whole lot more work to do on this. Streamlining it further, making it easier to make, making it a little bit less bulky if I can, and definitely cutting down on a lot of the noise. But it's definitely getting there. And when I do, I'll post the plans publicly so that everybody can make them. And that's the current version that you see sitting here right on the table that I tested earlier. So why Magnificool? Well, it taught me a whole lot about physics, trying to put this thing together and make it work. Throughout the process of making it, I got to meet a whole lot of really fun people in the headless lounges. I learned how to sew. I learned how to dance. I learned how to not throw a gimmicky promotional stunt. And I think it might be one of the most important projects that I have worked on. Because when you're in your fursuit, shouldn't you be more comfortable than when you're not? Something to think about. So that's all the projects that I have right now, actually. But I do have many, many more planned. The next big one that I want to tackle is definitely fursuit vision. I have a realistic head that has soda straw vision, and that's something that needs to change. I've been doing experiments with creating optical lenses out of 3D printed material so that they're much more affordable. And those rough proof of concepts actually seem to work, and I have one at my dealer's table you can check out. I'm not really so sure what direction I'm taking Mechanical Magnificus at that point. Because initially with the Robotail, I thought I was going to be making sails. And then with the Magnificlaws, I realized that making the same thing over and over again is kind of a drag. And with Magnificool, I realized that I should make this stuff available to everyone. So, we'll see how it goes. But whatever happens, I'm sure that DenFur is going to be a part of it. And I'm sure that it's going to be Magnificus. Thank you all so much. Thank you. I'll be sticking around for questions if anybody wants to, or if anybody wants to come up and check things out. I'll also have these things in the dealer's den right next door. Oh, I actually see a hand up here. Sure, what's up? I am probably still forklift certified. I wouldn't trust myself on a forklift though. What's up?
Have you considered using a phase change heat pump along with the water cooling vest to have the electricity powered thing for cooling?
Well, I'm not really sure what a phase change heat pump is, but I'll have to look into that.
Like a refrigerator or air conditioner?
Oh, I have looked into that actually. I was actually in contact with a company called Aspen Compressors to see if I could order one of their miniature refrigerator pumps. And I watched a couple videos. Adam Savage has a really, really good one actually on how to make something like that. But it was just going to be way too expensive, and you would still need to have like a big bulky thing outside of your costume.
I have another question.
Okay.
So what exact foam material are you using? While you're using foam on the tail in those segments?
On the tail here is Reynolds Advanced Materials Flex Foam It 14, I believe. Yeah, that stuff really good. I use that stuff for like everything. All right, with the ears?
Will this talk be online?
I will be posting a version of this talk on YouTube, actually. Just look for Mechanical Magnificus. And I don't have a lot of videos on my channel, so it should be pretty easy to find. All right, there. Oh, yes.
When you were making the tail, did you ever take biological inspirations?
Did I take biological inspirations from the tail? Absolutely. Yeah. The way that regular tails work is very, very similar. You've got something that's pulling, and it's changing the length of one side of a tail. And in fact, if you look at this thing at a cross section, each of the ribs are actually diamond shaped inside of the tail. So they have the very, well, I wouldn't say similar, but I'd say inspired by the vertebrae in an actual tail. Yeah.
So the tail that's a feline type tail, what's make a canine tail? Can you make the segments larger to allow for the sleeping room?
Most likely. So to make a canine tail, one that was fairly poofy, I would likely need some overlap between foam segments and do it in a tessellation of foam shells so that pieces can slide and overlap with each other. And then it still has that volume, but it doesn't have too much friction for the servos to overcome. So I've been thinking about it. I still haven't made one yet, but I'd love to. All right, yeah.
How hard do you think it would be to implement EEG with that?
To implement what?
EEG control to brainwave.
I'm so glad you asked that. How hard would it be to implement an EEG sensor to the tail, actually? I've actually already done this. There's a patch of Velcro here and a bunch of wires coming out of this because at home, I made an EEG module that sticks on here. And I did some tests with a couple of electrodes on my back, so it was measuring the back muscles. And then if I held a weight out to the side, the corresponding muscles would tense up, and the tail would actually respond to that motion. So if I go this way, or go that way, like that. I didn't bring it though because the EEG sensors are actually really oversensitive. So if anything touches them, the tail just freaks out. And I probably would need to use some pretty robust filters to try to make that more useful and more reasonable. But that's definitely a direction I would like to go with it, and I've been playing around with it, and it's a whole lot of fun. So I think we're probably going to call it here, but if anybody needs anything, come find me. I'd love to talk about crazy ideas with you. I'll be in the dealer's den for a bit. And yeah, thank you all so much. Have a great con.